we believe what we're reading in front of us every morning as we scroll on our way to work is that we won't have people, right? So AI is going to do all these things and we're not going to need the humans. But we also are supposed to be on Mars by now and on hoverboards and driving. We've been promised a lot in the past. Yes, AI is going to change how people work, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to fully, it's going to augment rather than replace. So that being said, I see that HR teams have an opportunity to actually take a more strategic view. It's not how are we processing new employees or how are we offboarding new employees or how are we managing performance processes. It's how are we engaging our people to be part of a healthy, thriving organization.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Off the Cuff with Powell, where we sit down with digital workplace experts from across our partner community to explore what's shaping the future of work. So, my name is Pierre. I lead the APAC region at Powell, where we help organizations make the most of Microsoft 365 with tools that connect people, simplify collaboration, and boost engagement in the digital workplace. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Sutter, CEO of Brighter Days, one of Powell's key partners in New Zealand. Sutter brings extensive experience helping organizations leverage HR strategy, technology, and culture to transform their digital workplace and overall enhance the employee experience. The topic we'll be exploring today is the HR role in the digital workplace revolution, and we explore how HR teams are driving change, supporting technology adoption, and overall shaping culture in a rapidly evolving digital workplace. So Sata, I don't know if you want to maybe give a quick word of introduction. Maybe you want to introduce quickly what you guys do at Brighter Days.
Sure. Brighter Days is a digital workplace consultancy. We basically say that we exist to transform workplace productivity, which is a pretty grandiose statement. When I am at a friend's barbecue and they ask what I do, I say that I lead a team that is focused on helping employees work well together. So, how do they communicate? How do they collaborate? How can we help them automate and innovate their processes? Yeah, so we do that. We do that across Microsoft 365. So, how to use Microsoft 365 Modern Workplace effectively, as well as we have our own platform for business automation called Solar Workplace, which does a lot of the same stuff, but just outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. But digital workplace is a digital workplace is a digital workplace.
Love it. Thanks a lot, Sutter, and great to have you here. All right, so just to start and maybe to set the scene around today's topic, I wanted to get your thoughts on how you see the HR role evolving within the digital workplace. Obviously, we've seen lots of changes in the last 5, 6 years. We went through a whole pandemic, brand new tools being rolled out in the workplace for employees to communicate and overall ensure business continuity. So I was wondering if you're seeing HR role evolving and if you're still seeing HR teams primarily operational or whether they're taking a more strategic leadership role within the digital workplace.
It's really mixed. So smart HR teams, or I should say wise HR teams, are definitely seeing that they have more of a role to play as a voice of their customer, which is the organization and also the people within the organization. They're at the forefront of organizational culture. So they are absolutely seeing that they can take the information that they capture from their engagement surveys and other tools to really start to bring a more human focused lens to what has probably predominantly been seen as a technology problem in the past, and
Yeah.
also being a bit more planned. So you've also got more structured project management coming in, trying to take a really focused view on what the requirements are as opposed to just throwing a system out and hoping that it catches on in the wild. Yeah, so HR teams, they're really putting that people and culture lens into this.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I've been with Powell for many years, it's been 7.5 years. And I look at 7.5 years back when we were looking at these digital workplace projects, it was mainly, communications and IT. And it's been a good 5 years that we're seeing HR playing a bigger role within these projects. So absolutely agree with you on this. So yeah, and obviously technology alone doesn't transform work. Adoption is really key in this. And so I was wondering how can HR teams influence employee engagement, adoption of new digital tools?
Yeah, it's like I said before, it's about using the information that they have to understand who their people are. What pace can they start moving at or continue to pick up new systems, new ways of working? What are the tactics that are going to work for their people? Every organization is so different. So, how can they take the information they have already and start to put a process and a technology lens across that? Yeah, I think it's recognizing that digital tools, yes, they're digital, but they don't stop at the digital part. There's a human at the end of it using it.
Yeah, and you've mentioned putting in place specific tactics to boost adoption. Have you seen anything that's worked better in your experience with the various customers you work with?
Well, one thing I'm seeing is, and this is specific to HR teams that are finding success, is that they're bringing the change role. So whether it be change management or maybe a little less of a formal role, but that look at that evaluation of what change looks like from where people are today to where the business wants their people to be. And they're bringing that inside of HR. Now, this is not a universal thing. It's not a very common thing, but I'm seeing some really interesting organizations that are thinking forward about how they do things differently. They're tired of seeing failed IT projects or other organizational transformation projects. And they're saying, what's the communication lens that we can bring to this? We've got these mechanisms to communicating with our people already. How can we leverage those existing channels as opposed to adding more? Make it more coordinated.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously, we see a lot of projects, being implemented by HR teams, but not only IT, communications, and so on, especially within this space. And sometimes we see customers that come to us and they're just trying to, tick boxes with features. And I was wondering what's your view on, how can HR ensure that the technology actually supports people and culture rather than just, simple processes?
I think it starts at the beginning. I'm a huge fan of human-centered design. So getting really clear on what are the challenges that we're actually trying to solve. Start wide, that whole ideation. What are the things that we could be doing that we need to be doing? And then starting to weave that through before leading with a solution or leading with a technology. Yep, we know we need an intranet or we need to refresh our intranet. Well, actually, why? What are we trying to use this intranet for? What are we trying to use this business automation tool for? Yeah, what are the problems we're trying to solve?
Yeah. And obviously, a lot of these projects are part of a broader digital transformation plan for organizations, whether it's a private company or a not-for-profit or local public sector organization. And very often it requires a shift in mindset and also behavior. And so I was wondering, how can HR lead that cultural change to support those new ways of working?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a couple things there. One is, and I know this term comes in and out of fashion very regularly, but there's an element of psychological safety in all this and creating or enabling a space where we might not get it right the first time, but let's be really upfront and honest and create that space to experiment and to evolve and iterate. Brighter Days, we're huge on the idea of iterative development, iterative projects where we do a big understanding up front, that discovery piece about what's the environment like now, what are the issues, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? But then chunking the delivery of that into elements that you can build on top of. And one of the reasons why is, and I came across this a couple of years ago, a friend of mine and I were talking, and he said, you know, if we leave things ambiguous, then we are going to create uncertainty. So if we're not clear on what we're actually doing, or we're not telling people, if we're not communicating with people, not just telling, if we're not listening and having conversations with people, then there's ambiguity. And if we have ambiguity, then things get uncertain. And if we're uncertain, then there's chaos. Everyone's moving in a slightly different direction. Maybe you think you're all moving in the same, using the same words, but people have a different takeaway of what that means. That uncertainty and that chaos then creates risk, and people freeze when there's risk, or they're fearful of there being a risk of not achieving perfection. So that lack of safety that comes out of that sense of feeling unsafe, basically causes people to disengage. And as I started thinking about that process, ambiguity leads to uncertainty, leads to chaos, to risk, to a sense of being unsafe. you start to go, of course, that's why people disengage. And then they don't want to any part of it. You could be delivering the best thing since sliced bread, but if they're not interested, they've moved on, then what's that for? What's the point? So I think that HR, people in culture, people in capability teams can reinforce that sense of that this is a cultural change, not just a digital change, and create that space to create an exploration of solutions. You can get some really interesting outcomes.
Yeah, and obviously with the amount of change that's being introduced by these projects, we're also seeing from an end user standpoint a lot of change fatigue that can
Oh,
happen and that can be raised by users. So how do you balance the change fatigue versus the innovation that's also needed to move forward?
well, it's funny. To me, I think the answer lies in addressing just what I was saying about that lack of certainty. So I think the reason why people, yes, we think that change fatigue happens because there's too much change. But I was actually listening to a podcast a couple of years ago by an organizational psychologist called Adam Grant. And he had picked up on this term during COVID. It was about languishing, this idea that people were languishing. They weren't thriving in their environments. And he and a neurologist that he was interviewing at the time talked about the fact that that's actually probably a biological response. And this is not my wheelhouse by any stretch, but I could see the dots connected. It was that people were languishing because there was so much uncertainty about what was happening. So back in the COVID days, it was, will I be able to get out of my house? Will my family be safe? But even in a work environment, if there's a whole bunch of transformation, quote unquote, happening, and we're not using regular words, plain English to describe what we're doing, then that is going to create that uncertainty. And that's what's going to cause the change fatigue because then people, it's almost like a fight or flight mode that they go into. And so, yeah, the more that we can just start to create a sense of awareness, again, it comes back to communication at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I love the reference to Adam Grant. I actually really like whatever content he put out there. So yeah, I really love it. That brings me actually to an interesting question because we see a lot of these projects sometimes being driven in silos by organizations where we just see, an HR team that's like, okay, we need to revamp how we spread culture within the organizations and how we vehicles those type of messaging and so on and so forth. And so they go out to vendors and to partners on their own really without consulting other parts of the business. So you obviously, as a Microsoft partner, work with IT very often. And so I was wondering, how do you see that, sometimes the friction between IT and HR teams or even with communication teams, and how important is it for these business units to really work hand in hand with IT departments to successfully roll out these new technologies?
So important, so important. Basically, we often will go in when we're just getting to know a business, and it might be the IT company that comes to, sorry, the IT team that comes to us first. But we say, great, this, whatever it is we're going to work on, this is going to be IT enabled. It's going to be technology enabled. There's no two ways about it. It's like I said, it's got digital in the name, whatever that problem is that we're trying to challenge. We've already identified that there's going to be an element of technology in it. But this can't just be a technology project. It has to, we say it's technology enabled, business centered. So it's working with the business units. They have to take an active role. And like we were saying at the very beginning, if it's HR, has especially if it's around a communications or a collaboration piece and it's the people part of it, but it might be operational. It's getting those business units heavily involved because that then helps us to identify again, what are the actual problems that we're trying to solve here?
Yeah, no, completely agree again. And that brings me to the next question. Once these teams are aligned and they understand what's the purpose of this project, what are we trying to achieve, then comes the question, okay, what tool are we going to use? What technology are we going to select? And so I was wondering, when HR teams are evaluating these digital workplace tools, how do you help them balance, innovation with just simply usability and employee engagement?
It really comes down to, and I guess this is also kind of talks about like what are the metrics of success really for how we know we'll have succeeded in this. It's going to be, it's the classic consultant answer of it depends, but it all goes back to what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So is it that it is an out of date technology platform? So for example, it might be a file migration, right? We need to get files. We've got all of our files on network drives and we've got to get them off of the network drives and into the cloud, bring them into SharePoint, for example. Okay, yep, that's a technology problem. But actually, in the course of doing that, let's understand how the individual business units use their files and how they're working to truly understand what the right structure is going to be. Because a lift and shift and treating the old technology like the new technology, it's like old wine in new bottles. It doesn't work. So it is using that as an opportunity to get really clear with the front line, the business users, of how do they work, because that's also then surfaces actually maybe, for example, using a spreadsheet to track time in lieu is a silly idea. We actually want to potentially use, well, one, our HR system, if that exists, or payroll, but actually even beyond that, maybe even a SharePoint list will work to help us get a bit more structure around that. So you start to surface little nags that the technology team might not even have been aware of. And suddenly we're bringing solutions. And that, going back to previous questions, that gets people enthusiastic too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned tracking success of those initiatives. And I was wondering when you're doing these projects with, especially so HR teams with to this topic, um, beyond the classic, okay, click rates, view likes, those type of things, what are some of the metrics that HR leaders should look at when evaluating the success of those initiatives?
I don't think it's even limited just to HR. I think it's any business and senior leader, but business manager, again, depending on the problem to be solved, right? If we have a really slow, laborious process for getting something approved, a requisition to hire, for example, what is, quite simply, what's the pace, the elapsed time from end to end of the new digital process versus whatever the previous process was. So it could be as simple as that, because that's an actual outcome for the business. It's not just an output. You're actually moving the dial and improving efficiency. Have we made it easier for people to find actually relevant information? What's the search effectiveness or the findability of this thing, that people know where to go? Do they know that it's a source of truth and not a version of a policy from 1998 that just happens to still be accessible because somebody lifted and shifted that from the file management system of that time into whatever the business is using now. So yeah, is the information relevant? Sometimes it's, are the number of questions that we're getting, the emails that we're getting, fewer because people know they can go to the team's page on an intranet and get FAQs answered right then and there. It's not to say it's replacing that human contact at all, but helping people self-serve can be, again, another good measurable time saving for an organization. And the last thing I'll throw out there, because I think it's such an important topic, is, are we reducing the number of shadow IT systems that are being used across a business? Because if we're actually providing tools that people can use, then it means they'll be less likely to go whip out their credit card and pay for a license of some third-party tool that nobody knows is being used. So yeah, I think shadow IT reduction is a great measure.
Yeah, shadow IT is a great point. There is so much shadow IT going on. Any organization out there, it's crazy.
And
And
AI is
actually,
making it worse, right? AI
yeah,
systems are just
absolutely,
so at people's fingertips.
absolutely. I actually have a really good example of this with so it's more of a lesson learned for us, and it's something that I'm now sharing as a best practice with customers who are trying to kickstart a project. But it's something that was I thought was really innovative and really smart from actually it was an HR team that drove that project. And so what they decided to do was to say instead of just, doing the classic user group where we take a group of 10 users, we put them into a room and we ask them what's missing, what's not working, etc., or the classic surveys that they send out to a wide range of employees and so on. What they've decided to do actually was to send a couple of HR spies within the organization. So
Like
they
secret
essentially,
shoppers.
pretty much, I mean, it was not really secret in the sense that they were basically going to a random employee within the organization and simply sitting next to them and asking them, okay, I need you to apply for leaves right now. Show me how you do it. Or I need you to find out, okay, how many sick leaves are you entitled to during a year? And how do you find that policy? Where do you find that information? Show me. And just tracking how they were doing it across the floor essentially and collecting feedback that way. So real life insights and then repeating the same thing after the project to see if things have changed. And I thought that was really, really smart because that's like real life tracking.
That's exactly right. That's the proof is absolutely right in front of your very eyes. That's fantastic.
Exactly. And so going on to the lessons learned, I guess you've obviously worked with a wide range of organizations out there, and so I was wondering what are some of the common misconceptions or mistakes that HR teams make when driving these digital workplace initiatives?
So there's two, and they're pretty high level. I'll be upfront about it, but I think they're strategically important to getting it right. So the first one is that they assume that just because it's a technology platform, it's a technology project, and they can throw it across the fence, give the requirements, and make it somebody else's problem to fix it, if you will, or introduce a new solution instead of being engaged and really owning the opportunity to have an influence in the outcome. The other thing I'll say is, and I think I might have touched on it at the beginning, is that we treat change as a project activity or a project task. And so we build it into our PMOs or into our IT team, and we say, okay, great, we're going to manage change. But actually, change is cultural, and we've got to see it beyond the life of any given digital transformation project. It is how the organization lives and breathes and how they carry that on across everything that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, not just specific to a project. So, some of the organizations that are really thinking outside the square on this are saying actually change can live within the HR team, the change management function. It leverages comms as an internal comms and what we're doing. It is leveraging the data that we're collecting about our employees and their engagement and really making the most of it as an input into where to from here.
Awesome. And so looking ahead, if we are, say, we're looking at 5 years from now, how do you think HR leaders should think about their role within the digital workplace? Is it going to be more tactical, strategic? Yes, you're allowed to talk about AI if you feel like it's relevant. We haven't even talked about it so far, but you can.
Because that's the thing, right? If we believe what we're reading in front of us every morning as we scroll on our way to work, it's that we won't have people, right? So AI is going to do all these things and we're not going to need the humans. But we also are supposed to be on Mars by now and on hoverboards and driving. We've been promised a lot in the past. Yes, AI is going to change how people work, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to augment rather than replace. So that being said, I see that HR teams have an opportunity to actually take a more strategic view. It's not how are we processing new employees or how are we offboarding new employees or how are we managing performance processes. It's how are we engaging our people to be part of a healthy, thriving organization. So it is totally taking a much more strategic view of the whole purpose of an HR function. And like all changes, there will be some organizations that saw this years ago and have already changed, and there'll be some that we could be having this conversation in 10 years and they'll still be saying the same thing. But I think the tide is certainly rising.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, a lot of HR leaders are really going to have to think also about how do we start onboarding, a whole new generation that was born with, AI and devices and really
Completely. The
that grew
expectation
up
that,
with it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And, the expectation that, well, either that their device is theirs and they're not going to carry two phones, for example, because
Hmm.
it's a device is a device is a device. Or also, take it to the other side, you've got the younger generations that are really focused on division between work and life. And they don't want to be accessible 24/7. I take pride in being able to be relied upon and get things done, but that's because I'm, you know, nearing 50 and that's my DNA. The team that I work with, that is not how they think. Hard workers when they're ready, but when they clock out, they clock out.
I can absolutely relate to that. I mean, I started my career in Asia where it was really important to be at your desk at 8:30 in the morning and be there until your manager leaves. And it really shaped me as I am today. So it is quite a shift seeing the new generation coming into the workforce where it's a completely different mindset.
And you read about it often in HR forums, but it's that multi-generational workforce. How do you manage that so that the people who are hardwired as we have been, we need to coexist alongside of people who have completely different expectations. So it's really got to be kind of one kitchen, but serving from multiple dining rooms.
Yeah, it's gonna be super interesting to see how that pans out in the next couple of years. Yeah, awesome. But look, thanks so much for being with us today. Just before we wrap things up, I've got a couple of more, quick fire questions just to wrap it up. Uh, so, in your opinion, is there one digital workplace trend you think HR really should not ignore? And maybe what we just talked about partly answered that.
Completely. It's a multi-generational workplace. You can't get away from it.
Yeah. A common buzzword you think we should retire or completely ban?
Well, where do I begin? Where do I begin? Frankly, I almost think digital transformation, it's meaningless now. What do we actually, let's get specific.
I feel like it's been 25 years we've been in digital transformation. Awesome. And is there one habit that you think every organization should adopt to make hybrid work, or at least the new way of working, actually work?
Yeah, because we haven't even talked about hybrid. That's a whole
Hmm.
different ballgame as well. This might be a chicken answer. Trust. The only way that any kind of organization where it's not presenteeism can really thrive is trust. Trust in the workplace.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And finally, two questions about Brighter Days overall. I wanted to ask you if Brighter Days was a superhero, who would it be?
Well, this is where I show that I'm not very into Marvel and other things. So the only superheroes that come to mind are like Superman.
Superman?
And I think it's because we can have conversations with our digital colleagues, and then we can pop into the phone box and put on our alter ego and have conversations with front end business users.
Love it. And final one, is there one Microsoft tool, or not Microsoft actually, that your team could not live without?
Teams.
Teams?
Yeah, we live in Teams daily. So we actually, since before my time at Brighter Days, and I've been with Brighter Days for almost 6 years, we make internal email a four-letter word, and there used to be a hard ban on using internal email, and we use Teams to connect, to communicate, and even for the front end to a lot of our file storage within SharePoint as well.
Yeah. I think I would have to go with Teams as well. It's literally where I spend, I'd say 70-80% of my day. So
Yes,
I'd have to go with the same.
yes. But there's using Teams and there's using Teams, and it's making sure there's a really good way. That's a whole different conversation for another podcast about using Teams.
We'll make sure to do it. Look, Sarah, thanks so much for sharing your insights from driving adoption to aligning people with technology to leading that culture change. I think there is a lot that our listeners can take away from today's conversation. But before we sign off, can you share how our listeners can follow your work at Brighter Days and keep up with, your insights on HR and digital workplace at Microsoft in general? Anywhere
Definitely.
we can
Follow us
follow?
follow us on LinkedIn. We're actually just in the midst of kicking off some new LinkedIn campaigns and really being more of a presence there. So definitely follow us on LinkedIn. We're also on the web at brighterdays.com.
Love it. And if there are listeners in New Zealand, I know a lot of the Brighter Days people speak at conferences, also in webinars once in a while. So make sure to go to these sessions.
Yeah, we'd love to chat more.
Awesome. And of course, stay tuned for another episode of Off the Cuff with Powell soon, where we'll explore how our partner community is shaping the future of the digital workplace. Thanks so much, Sutter, for your time.
Oh, thanks, Pierre. It's been great.
Awesome.